experiences, you are perhaps not automatically determined to be a certain way, but high likelihood to be a certain way. You see this in theories. Freud was huge on this. The idea that your childhood experiences are going to reverberate for the rest of your life. If something traumatic happened to you, then pretty much every way that you are, everything that you do can somehow be explained by that. It's not true. We're much more complex creatures. Does the way we're raised influence the way we are as adults? Of course it does. Oh my gosh, yes. However, what I'm commenting against is this idea that you're stuck. And I think that really was Diane's worry. I stayed at home at 27. It was a very nasty household. Mom flung dishes at Dad. I had to, quote unquote, protect the kids. I think she implied, I didn't quite pick up all the details, but I think she implied after she left home, she got into kind of profligate living. And she pulled herself together, she said, at age 40 and sought therapy. And I think she was asking when she used the word brainwashed, that was her way of saying, am I stuck? Am I this way no matter what? For Christians, that'd be like saying the Holy Spirit can't do anything about it because we're already psychologically on track in a certain direction. Christians believe the Holy Spirit has great power to convert souls. And even if you're not a Christian, even if you don't turn to God and His grace for help, psychologically speaking, why is it that some people who have the most horrific upbringings go on to be beautiful human beings? A priest friend of mine talks about a very, very tough upbringing. He went on to be a priest, and a well-known priest, and a very faith-filled priest. How do you do that? If you just look at the upbringing, you say odds of that are pretty low. He didn't even grow up in a religious household at all. How'd that happen? You're not bound by your childhood. It can definitely make it tough for you to get past some of the stuff that you experienced, or better said, the lack of what you didn't get, the love, the stability, the moral instruction. That's really where the damage takes place, because it's more ongoing. A traumatic event happens at a point in time, maybe in place, but the ongoing neglect or lack of upbringing is what is more likely to influence into adulthood. Got to run. Thank you for joining me on this Look Back Friday. I appreciate it so very, very much. Walk with God. You can do that as an adult, no matter what your childhood was like.
For information on Dr. Ray's presentations, books, and CDs, visit drray.com and follow him on Facebook and Instagram. The Doctor Is In is a co-production of Ave Maria Radio and EWTN Radio and carried across the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
As we prepare for the celebration of Easter, Lent offers us a path of transformation. This is the Guadalupe Radio Network, radio for your soul.
All students in grades 8th through 12th are invited to a fun, faith-filled, Eucharistic-centered retreat. The Ablaze Weekend Retreat will take place on Friday, April 25th through Sunday, April 27th at Holy Family of Nazareth Catholic Church in Irving. The retreat is an opportunity for young people to encounter the power and richness of God's love and mercy. The weekend is led by the Franciscan Friars and Sisters of the Renewal. The retreat features inspiring talks, lively music, faith, and fellowship. To register, visit ablazeretreat.com.
Do you wonder who decides if your flight is on time, delayed, or canceled, calculates weight and balance, or plans your route of flight? Aircraft dispatchers are responsible for these decisions and more. My wife and I operate Aircraft Dispatcher Training Center in Farmers Branch, where you can earn your FAA Aircraft Dispatcher certificate. We attend Mass at St. Anne's Church in Coppell and are blessed to be sponsors of the GRN. For more, you can find us at adtcdallas.com.
Hi, this is David B. Wright, founder and former CEO of 40 Days for Life, and it is a tremendous honor to be partnering with the Catholic pro-life community and you as we prepare for the 32nd annual Bishop's Dinner on Saturday, April 5th at the Weston Park Central Hotel in Dallas. Pledge today to join me and Bishop Burns as we work to make North Texas better together for life.
Go to prolifedallas.org/dinner for tickets and sponsorships.
When I see him like this, I feel so helpless.
Hi, everybody. Show starts in a couple minutes.
And I know he's hurting. But what can I do?
He's confided in me about his role in an abortion, so I can't betray that trust.
Project Joseph helps men who have been involved in a decision that led to abortion.
Project Joseph guides men through that pain and into God's comfort and forgiveness.
So many men feel alone when they suffer from a past abortion experience, but they aren't. Ask your friend to visit projectjosephdallas.org for confidential help.
The pain is real, so is the help. Visit projectjosephdallas.org. A message from Project Joseph of Dallas, a ministry for men who have suffered the experience of abortion.
Welcome to Back to the Father, a show about the journey of life focused on our final end, which is God Himself, our loving Father. And now, here's your host, Dave Palmer.
And welcome to this week's Back to the Father here on the Guadalupe Radio Network. This is a show that is focused on the teachings of St. Thomas Aquinas in his Summa Theologia, which was written in the 13th century. We're glad that you are with us, and whether you're watching this live or as a recording, we are thankful for your participation and being part of the show. My name is Dave Palmer. We've been doing this for a number of years now, and it's kind of evolved over the ages, the years, but I like what we're doing right now because starting last week, I started laser focusing on the Eucharist because I've become convinced that, well, not just me, but a lot of people have said if you believe in the Eucharist and you dedicate your life to that belief and you believe in transubstantiation, you're never going to leave the Catholic Church. And so, yeah, we can believe in the Eucharist through faith. That would be the easiest and probably the ordinary way to just accept it because we have the supernatural gift of faith. But 66% of Catholics have not caught on to that. Even the baptized ones who are going to Mass don't believe in it. And so we got to dig a little bit deeper. And I think the teachings of St. Thomas Aquinas in the Summa about the Eucharist are really important to dig into. I also have with me Sissel Anderson. She's on the other side of the glass, and she is kind of the sounding board. I bounce things off her, and wouldn't be the same without you, Sissel. So thank you for being part of the show.
You were talking about that we've been doing this for a while, and it's, a lot of things have changed. But what hasn't changed is that I've never graduated from this class of learning. I think that's
you never do.
I never do. I'm just like I'm the constant student who constantly is forgetting the things that you've already taught me.
Well, two ways you can graduate. You could quit your job.
Okay,
that seems kind of drastic. Or you could, like email Toya and say, Toya, I've had enough. This is just too much. Can you take me off this show? Can you throw Loney on here? One of the Loneys. I just can't take this any longer. So, anyway, no, it's good. I really appreciate your input because we said from the very beginning, even the first show, is that Sissel doesn't have formal philosophical or Thomistic training, which is great because she acts as a sounding board, and I can kind of see what does a person who and again, I'm not like any kind of lofty intellectual, but I have spent, 11 years or so daily digging into the Summa and teaching it. And so I consider myself somewhat of an expert, but Sissel, she has other areas that she's interested in. So it's good to just kind of see what she thinks about things. So I appreciate you, Sissel, very much.
Thank you.
And I also appreciate everybody who is on with us now. Let me ask you something. I sent out earlier this week, I think it was about 4 days ago, the articles that we are going to cover today. The topic today is What's the Matter? And I just love that because it's just such a cute title, because it sounds like I'm going to air out, like some kind of emotional distress or something.
I keep thinking of like an Italian guy. I mean, like, what's the matter?
But
so sorry.
the whole thing is we're talking about the matter of the Eucharist, okay? So it has nothing to do with like, what's the matter? I mean, what, you angry at me or what? But the matter of the Eucharist. And this is question 74 of the Summa. There are 8 articles, and I'm telling you, if you hang with me, this next hour, and this one may take an hour because there's so much to talk about, is, the matter of the Eucharist is the physical, sensible part of it, which we know to be bread and wine, right? But have you ever thought, let me just throw a few questions out there, because these are the kind of questions that Aquinas is going to ask. Why bread and wine? Why not apples and water? Why not, bananas? Or, seriously, why grapes? Why wine? Why? And have you ever noticed during Mass that the priest will put a little bit of water into the wine? Have you ever? You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
And you ever notice that they take great pains to just put a tiny bit in there? Okay, why is that? First of all, why is water put in the first place? If anybody out there listening, if you know, God bless you. If you don't know, well, you're going to know by the end of this show. And also, why water in the first place, and why just a tiny, tiny little bit? Why can't you put, like a whole cup of water in there? There's a very, very good reason. Also, why wheaten bread? Why unleavened bread? These kind of things. And so I love that in these 8 articles, Aquinas is not going to get into transubstantiation. He's not going to get into the substance of the Eucharist and the change and the rite. It's all about the matter. Okay, why the physical, material element of the Eucharist. These are what these 8 questions are going to have to do with. So it's really rather interesting. So hang with me. And of course, we always appreciate your comments and your questions if you want to participate in the first place. So let me first of all throw a little bit of a doozy question at you, and go ahead and answer in the comments if you know the answer. But I told Sissel this question was coming, so she's not getting completely blindsided. But when I use the word metaphysics, what does that mean? And it actually applies to this. I thought we had talked about this in this program already before, maybe not.
And we may have, but it wasn't like last week. Okay.
So, and if you don't know, that's all right. I actually have a hard time kind of even.
I find it's a very hard thing to define. I find it
like, what's the first word that comes to your mind? Just word association. I say metaphysics. You say
I'd
what?
say something like abstract. Does that sound like that's
no? That's a great answer.
Abstract, basically something like that's. I don't think I know the exact definition. I think it's just something like where it's something about talking about the abstract.
Yeah. Well, no, I think abstract would be a very, very good. Like if you were playing Family Feud and 100 people are surveyed, I think abstract would probably be the number one answer. But yeah. So, and I've watched a lot of videos. I've read a lot of things about metaphysics, and probably the best answer that somebody would give is that it has to do with the study of being. Okay, like what exists. All right. So if you and again, I don't want to get too into the weeds, but if you look out and you see a bird, right? There's the material aspect of the bird, But then a metaphysician would say, well, there's an essence of the bird. There's a nature of the bird. But you can't see essences. You can't see a nature, right? So the very fact that those things are beyond the senses would mean that they are metaphysical, because Aristotle, I think, was the first one to use this terminology. Meta means above or beyond. Okay, so above or beyond the physical. And the reason I mention this in light of today's topic is that I think I mentioned this last week, when we see what appears to be bread or what appears to be wine, last night I was very blessed to go to adoration over at Good Shepherd Parish in Colleyville, and I spent an hour in front of Jesus. But, anybody looking at me from the outside who was not aware of the Catholic teaching on transubstantiation would say this guy just stood in front of he just sat in front of and kneeled in front of a piece of bread for an hour. And that in and of itself seems a little ridiculous. That seems like a bit of a waste of time. But the metaphysician in me does not believe that it's just bread and wine. The metaphysician in me says there's something beyond, there's something above the senses. And that's why when we talk about the material aspect of the Eucharist, like we're going to talk about today, we're not talking about metaphysics today. We're talking about material. So we're talking about only the things that you can see. When you go and receive the Eucharist, especially before it's consecrated, bread and wine. And it's just the same old bread and wine that you would have for dinner, right, before the consecration of the Eucharist. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about on the program today. And Sissel, feel free to cut me off anytime you see any comments.
Yep. Well, Timoteo's there, so I just want to say hi to Timoteo.
Oh, okay. Timoteo's got to be like the GRN social media MVP. I mean, that guy
should get a badge.
Hasn't he called into the Quest also?
Yeah, he's called into the Quest. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. All right, Timoteo, well, thank you so much. I know there's some other folks out there as well. And if you feel like identifying yourself, you can. But let's get started with this because, again, I think that this is going to be pretty interesting. Okay, you be the judge. You tell me at the end of this hour
if it's interesting or not.
I'm just going to ask Sissel at the end. Was that interesting or not? I can almost guarantee, if you're paying attention, okay, if you're paying attention, that's the qualifier, that you're going to find this interesting. Starting right here, because this first part is going to be interesting. So Article 1, if you want to pop that up, Sissel, and you do have all the graphics,
yep,
right?
I
Okay,
do.
so Article 1 says whether the matter of this sacrament is bread and wine. All right, so obviously the answer is yes, it's bread and wine, but why bread and wine? So if you read the Summa, you'll know that it always starts with objections. Okay, so Thomas is going to give the objections to bread and wine. Now, I told you this is interesting. Now, listen to the first objection here. The first objection is the flesh of animals, which was the matter of the sacraments under the old law, shows forth Christ's passion more fully than bread and wine. Therefore, the matter of the sacrament ought rather to be the flesh of animals than bread and wine. Huh. So what are they suggesting? That every single Mass we should kill a lamb or something, right? I mean that literally the flesh of animals should be the matter of the sacrament, right? I mean it kind of makes sense, but it seems a little impractical at every single Mass
especially you think about some parishes have more than one daily Mass a day, or there's so many animals. I think the vegans might have something to say about that.
Yeah, and it would, and so Thomas is going to answer that. Okay, so that the instead of bread and wine, we should be slaughtering animals at every single Mass. Okay, that's an objection. Another one, and this one makes some sense as well. He says, in many lands, bread is not to be found. And in many places, wine is not to be found, right? So there's a practical, problem is that, in some places you can't find this, right? And also the third one, and maybe you've thought about this before, I certainly have, to some weak persons, wine is hurtful. I love how we put that. Oh, you ever thought about that? Well, what about alcoholics?
Oh, to receive the wine? Well, I've always just thought of unless we're talking about the priest, which we'd probably have some bigger problems if we're talking about a priest being an alcoholic. But I would have always just you don't have to receive on with the blood.
You're thinking like Aquinas.
Yeah, you don't have to because it's the bread, the Eucharist contains the body, blood, soul, and divinity.
Yeah, and also if you're like gluten free.
Yeah, I used to receive a low gluten host.
But nowadays, not
you
every
can't. By the way,
Mass.
no host is gluten free. For the record.
Oh, is that right?
It's low gluten. They're very specific. It's low gluten because it has to have some gluten content in it.
So he'll come back and answer these objections, but you've already answered one of them. Is he's saying,
"You're welcome,
hey,
people."
He's saying, hey, if you have an addiction to alcohol, you can't receive it for one reason or another. Well, don't receive it because you receive the precious body and the precious blood in the host as well, but not in the same way. Interestingly, not in the same way. But that'll be for another show. All right, now get this. In the I Answer That, this is what's called the corpus. He gives examples of what some other people have done through history instead of bread and wine, which of course is not right. But he says Augustine says that some offer bread and cheese in this sacrament, contending that oblations were celebrated by men in their first ages from fruit of the earth and sheep. And of course, you'd get the cheese from the sheep milk, right? Interesting. Others are reputed to, now get this is really weird. Others are reputed to have made their Eucharistic bread with infant's blood, drawn from tiny punctures over the entire body and mixed with flour. Others, under the guise of sobriety, offer nothing but water in this sacrament. So historically, there have been some people that have done things other than bread and wine. So is it absolutely necessary that it has to be bread and wine? Thomas says, consequently, bread and wine are the proper matter of the sacrament. First, in the use of the sacrament, which is eating, for water is used in the sacrament of baptism for the purpose of cleansing. Bread and wine are spiritual eating. So we talked about that last week, how the main kind of signification of the sacrament is that it's baptism is for generation or cleansing, confirmation is for growth or reaching a perfect age of maturity, and the Eucharist is for nutrition. Okay, it correlates with the nutrition of the body, right? And so he also says, in relation to Christ's passion, in which the blood was separated from the body, and the bread is received apart from the sacrament of the body, and wine as the sacrament of the blood. So as the blood separates from the body, you have two separate, species, the bread and the wine, which I found kind of interesting as well. So now he goes, this is kind of interesting. Fourthly, as to the effect with regard to the whole church, which is made up of many believers, just as bread is composed of many grains, and wine flows from many grapes. Have you ever heard that one?
Wine?
So,
okay.
So you have a lot of believers, a lot of people in the body of Christ, and so you have a lot of grapes that go into wine. You have a lot of grains that go into the bread. So pretty interesting. So so now he's going to answer some of the objections. Remember, they said, hey, not every country has wine. Not every place has bread, right? He says, although wheat and wine are not produced in every country, yet they can easily be conveyed to every land, that is, as much as is needful. Okay, so even back in the 13th century, Aquinas is saying, listen, if somebody doesn't have it, we can get it to them. Okay?
And now we don't even have any excuse really today.
I know.
Although Carrie, I don't know if Aquinas talks about this at all, or if you're familiar. I feel like I remember having some conversation with somebody at some point in time. That was a lot of sums. Some very vague conversation about if a priest was like in a situation where he didn't, like, let's just say, I don't know, in the back on a hiking trip or something like that, because some college groups will go, and somehow or another they don't have the hosts. Mm-hmm. Is there anything acceptable to be used in place or not?
And you don't have wine either?
Let's say that you don't. Let's say you don't, but let's say it is a Sunday and you would like to be able to celebrate. Is that like?
But you don't have.
You wouldn't be able to use this sounds really silly, but you wouldn't be able to use something like a tortilla or whatever we might have.
I don't think so. Okay. I don't think you can do the mass.
I didn't think so. That's what my thought, but I just wanted to make sure.
That's not like. I think it's so implied in all these articles that you have. Well, it's this article right here. You have to have bread and wine. I mean, the interesting thing is, like, what if you only had bread and not wine? Can you just consecrate the bread? I don't think so, because the Eucharistic prayer, and again, he's saying that these two are necessary. Just like the blood is separated from the body, you have to have both of them. So I think the camping trip, the priest hey man, you either bring it with you and you think or else you just, have a liturgy of the word and read scripture, but you're not going to have a mass if you don't have this stuff. I'm pretty sure that's right. Okay, so now the argument about wine is harmful to some people. Cecil already kind of highlighted this. He said, wine taken in small quantity cannot do the sick man much harm. Yet if there be fear of harm, it is not necessary for all who take Christ's body to partake also of his blood. So, as Cecil mentioned before. I've never really thought about that. If somebody is an alcoholic, do they receive the precious blood, or would they just not do it? Even that little one sip?
Sip. I guess it depends on where they are in their recovery and stuff. And then for people who are celiac or have severe gluten allergies, the low gluten hosts, they have to. It was determined, I think in the early 2000s, it was determined that for the host to be valid, it had to have a very, very, very small percentage at least of gluten in it.
Oh, okay. So it can be low gluten, but not gluten-free.
So I think it's like a 0.01% of gluten. Although I do have friends who are so sensitive they can't even have that. But that's why the wine's available. So just don't be an alcoholic and gluten free.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. You choose your poison, right?
Right.
Or, well, I'd rather be bitten neither of them. But so one of them, you probably can't help. By the way, did anybody actually do the reading? Timoteo, did you get? I'm just curious, because I know it's not something that it'd take a while. I mean, if you're going to read 8 articles of the Summa, it's probably going to take you an hour or so of time. We had reading. So Cecil did not do the reading. Which is fine. I mean, you've got enough on your plate, but I put them out there, and I'll keep doing it, because it's really not like that hard for me to do it. But if people want to read and look at it ahead of time, I think if anybody was to do it, it would have been Timoteo. I mean, Timoteo's the guy that would have done it.
No pressure, though.
All right, let's move on to article number 2. There's 8 articles in this one, and this one says whether a determinate quantity of bread and wine is required for the matter of this sacrament. Okay, so do you have to have a particular amount of bread and wine? Okay, this is what St. Thomas Aquinas is thinking of next. And these objections are humorous in a way. So listen to this one. And again, have you ever thought about this? They say it would lead to mockery of this sacrament if the priest were to wish to consecrate all the bread which is sold in the market and all the wine in the cellar. Therefore, he cannot do so. Think about that. I mean, just as a thought experiment, if a priest were to walk into a liquor store, okay, and this is what, I'm not making a mockery of this. This is what Thomas is getting at. And he says the words of consecration, does all that wine turn into the body and blood of Christ? Have you ever thought of that? I mean, think about that.
No, I mean, wait. So, I guess it would it have to be that he is he actually intending I want to make this whole store full of wine, the blood of Christ?
Yeah, I mean, does intention matter? I mean, it's not intention; it's the words, right?
But imagine that 2 people are show up to get married, but they're not actually intending. You know what I mean? If a priest stands in front of 2 people and says the words, gives the words for this mass of matrimony, would that make them married, even if they don't really want to be married and they've never had that intent?
Well, you're moving over to another sacrament.
Oh, sorry.
So I mean, I can't speak about marriage.
Oh, well, I'm just talking about, I'm talking about sacraments though. The words only matter. Does there have to be some form of intention?
Well, I mean, I think the words are the form of the sacrament. Okay, so the words are what give it what it is. But I don't think it's exactly the same for every single sacrament. Like in the sacrament of the Eucharist, it's not the priest's words, it's the words of Christ.
Right.
And I do remember, and we'll get to it eventually with this, is that the only thing the priest does is say the words. I mean, that's his role. I mean, there's nothing that he needs to do other than say the words. But and again. And I also don't think that the entire Eucharistic prayer is necessary. I think that the words of consecration, if they are said, But you could get into a lot of different thought experiments. Like, what if he says it in his sleep, or what if he says it accidentally, or what if he's drunk, or
what if they're like teaching about it and they say the way, what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. He's just saying, hey, this is what I say during a mass. And he says the words, okay. But anyway, so keep that one in mind. That's one of the objections. Like, what if could a priest consecrate all the wheat bread at a grocery store if he wanted to? This one's interesting also. He says, if anyone be baptized in the sea, the entire seawater is not sanctified by the form of the baptism, but only the water wherein the body of the baptized is cleansed. So if somebody's in like the Caspian Sea and they do the baptism of the water, is like all that water going to be, again, Aquinas is just kind of geeking out on these questions here, but they are kind of interesting. Then he says, there's no quantity, however small, of the bread and wine which cannot be consecrated. Therefore, neither is there any quantity, however great, which cannot be consecrated. So if you could consecrate a tiny, tiny, tiny little piece of bread, well, why can't you consecrate a whole row of bread at the grocery store or something like that, right? So those are the objections. Aquinas says, some have maintained that the priest could not consecrate an immense quantity of bread and wine, for instance, all the bread in the market or all the wine in the cask, but this does not appear to be true. But the quantity of the matter of this sacrament must be determined by comparison with the use of the faithful, but this cannot be determined by comparison with the use of the faithful who are actually present. It remains then for the matter of the sacrament to be determined in reference to the number of the faithful, absolutely, but the number of the faithful is not determined at once. So basically saying there really is no limit, okay? There is no limit to how much he can consecrate. So I guess in theory he could go into a wine store and just consecrate the whole thing, but I think that would be like really, really bad for him to do that. Okay. So, anyways, and you may notice there in that picture that I have for the slide.
Yes.
That's a picture of a grocery store.
A lot of wine.
That's the bread there at the grocery store.
I was looking at it on the tiny version. I couldn't see.
Yeah, I know it is. It is kind of tiny. So, all right, article number 3. Whether wheaten bread is required for the matter of this sacrament. Okay, do you have to have wheaten bread? What would you think about that? So if you had to take a guess at it, does it have to be wheat bread, or can it just be any kind of bread?
Well, based on my brief research about the low gluten stuff, I'm going to say yes, that it has to be wheaten bread. I don't have a reasoning for it. I just am thinking that
you're
it does.
About to get a reasoning.
Oh, okay. Am I right?
No, you are right. Yeah. Okay, one of the objections, I find this interesting. The objection says, I think barley bread would seem to be more in keeping with the passion than wheaten bread, as being more bitter, because Christ used it to feed the multitude upon the mountain. So since the passion is kind of bitter and sad, well, maybe we should use some kind of bread that has more of a bitter taste than a sweet taste to it. Another objection says, mixing dissolves species, but wheaten flour is hardly to be found unmixed with some other species of grain. Okay, so you're going to have a lot of different grains in the wheaten bread. Another one, what is corrupted appears to be of another species, but some make of the sacrament from bread which is corrupted, and which no longer seems to be wheaten bread. All right, so interesting. So what if you have wine that's going sour? What if you have bread that's starting to get
quality's not good.
It's starting to get a little moldy or starting to get a little bit bad. Okay, can you still consecrate? I mean, these are very legitimate questions, right? So why wheaten bread? Okay, listen to this. Okay, here's Thomas's answer. Christ is contained in this sacrament as he compares himself to a grain of wheat. In John 12:24, unless the grain of wheat fall into the ground and die, itself remains alone. Therefore, bread from corn, wheaten bread, is the matter of this sacrament. That's from corn? Is that right?
What is from corn?
I have no idea. It says, therefore, bread from corn.
Oh, yeah.
That is, see, I don't know why.
How do you make bread from corn? I imagine you use like a cornmeal or something like that and add it to bread.
Wheat bread is from corn?
Oh, it's saying wheat bread is from corn.
I don't know. I mean, that's what it says.
I'm going to be honest. These days, everything's very muddled together. So I'm not sure about in his time what that would have looked like.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, he says, for the use of the sacraments, such matter is adopted as is commonly made use among men. Now, among other breads, wheaten bread is more commonly used by men, since other breads seem to be employed when this fails. And Christ is believed to have instituted this sacrament under the species of bread. Moreover, this bread strengthens man, and so it denotes more suitable the effect of the sacrament. And then in the answer to the barley bread thing, he said barley bread serves to denote the hardness of the old law. Okay, so the fact that they used it in the Old Testament
means that we don't use it in the
not in the new one.
Interesting.
And then he says, and then he doubles down. He says the barley denotes the people themselves who were not yet despoiled of carnal desires, which clung to their hearts like fiber. But this sacrament belongs to Christ's sweet yoke and to the truth already manifested, and to a spiritual people. Consequently, barley bread would not be suitable as a matter for this sacrament. So it's a sweeter bread. It's a something that's a little bit sweeter. And then let me see. Is that the end of that one? Okay, this is Article 3, right? Yeah, I mean,
yes.
Yeah, and he says, as far as like, the wheat bread has all kinds of different grains mixed in it. He says a moderate mixing does not alter the species because that little is, as it were, absorbed by the greater. Okay, so he's saying, if there's a couple little grains, it's going to get absorbed into the rest of it. So, all right, so let's move on to Article number 4. And if you have any questions out there, and as you go through this, is this new stuff? Have you ever heard about this? I don't think this is taught like in second grade CCD class, although maybe it should be, because it is interesting to know why are we using these things, as opposed to other things.
Yeah, I think I feel like we don't go into that. We don't go into that much detail, and I think after a certain point, maybe we just stop looking into it. After catechism classes, people don't continue to study it on their own. By the way, Timoteo is saying that that he thinks that then wheat was also referred to as corn, possibly. Okay. So I have no idea.
I'm like really ignorant when it comes to that stuff.
Right.
I don't know how I just eat it. I go to the grocery store and I eat it, but because I always think of wheat as being, like a wheat field, and you know what wheat looks like, right?
Yeah, but, yeah, it does. It looks like very...
Yeah, gosh.
It's really hard to describe what wheat looks like.
Yeah, I know.
It's a certain It's a stalk.
Shape.
It's like a stalk, and it's got like almost looking like braided pieces of wheat.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what the corn reference was. So, all right, Article 4 says whether this sacrament ought to be made of unleavened bread.
Ooh, this one's interesting.
Yeah. Now, okay, so whether the sacrament ought to be made of unleavened bread, well, why unleavened? And unleavened would mean that when you cook it, it doesn't rise, right? Because it would have yeast in it otherwise.
Yeah,
right?
basically it doesn't have any rising agent, so it's going to stay flat. It's not going to rise in the oven.
Yeah. So interesting. First objection, and this seems a little nitpicky. But it says, but it's kind of interesting nonetheless. It says, but Christ appears to have instituted this sacrament in fermented bread, because as we have read in Exodus 12, the Jews, according to the law, began to use unleavened bread on the day of the Passover, which is celebrated on the 14th day of the moon, and Christ instituted this sacrament at the supper, which he celebrated before the festive day of the Pasch. And so they're getting kind of like in the nitpicky timing of it. Like, okay, this was done before the Passover, and so the Jews didn't use unleavened bread until the Passover, right? Okay, now this one's interesting. Objection 2, it says legal observances ought not to be continued in the time of grace, but the use of unleavened bread was a ceremony of the law. Okay, so here's what he's getting at. Have you ever heard, Sissel, the argument that Christian boys should not be circumcised because that's a Jewish practice?
Yeah, it's a Jewish,
Or, and I've done this before, some people say we should not do Seder meals Okay, you familiar with the Seder meal?
Yeah. Vaguely. I'm not going to say I know it all, but I understand.
Yeah, and the Seder meal was a Jewish kind of Passover practice, but sometimes Christians like to do it on like Holy Thursday. They have a Seder meal in preparation for Easter. And I've done it before, but I've heard some people say, no, don't do that. That's an old law thing, okay? So that's the objection here, is he's saying that this observance of unleavened bread, that's Old Testament. Okay, that's Jewish. That should not be part of the Christian tradition, because we've got to undo ourselves of those things, right? And then let's see, one more objection. A couple more. The Eucharist is the sacrament of charity, just as baptism is the sacrament of faith. But the fervor of charity is signified by fermented bread. As is declared, okay, so fermented bread represents, the rising of joy and charity. And so if we're celebrating charity and joy in the Eucharist, why are we using something that doesn't rise? Okay, that's the argument. And then finally, leavened or unleavened bread are accidents of bread which do not vary the species. So basically that one is like, who cares? I mean, does it really matter? And why are we, getting ourselves all wrapped up in this, okay? All right, so the answer. Two things may be considered touching the matter of the sacrament, namely what is necessary and what is suitable. It is necessary that the bread be wheat, without which the sacrament is not valid. It is, however, not necessary for the sacrament that the bread be unleavened, since it can be celebrated either way. Did you know that? Okay, so it doesn't have to be unleavened bread. Now, I'm assuming that modern day practices are the same as they were in St. Thomas Aquinas' day. I'm guessing this is still the practice. But then he says, but it is suitable that every priest observe the rite of the church in the celebration of the sacrament. Now he says something that I find very interesting. He said, the Roman Church offers unleavened bread because our Lord took flesh without the union of sexes, but the Greek churches offer leavened bread. Okay, did you know that?
I feel like, and I could be completely speaking out of turn here, but I do believe there are some rites still around that have more of that of Eastern influence that do have a more leavened bread. It's not like puffy, you know what I mean? But it is more leaven that I've seen in some churches. Like I want to say the Byzantines.
Yeah,
I think the Byzantines do.
And you think also the fact that Aquinas is writing in the 13th century. The East and the West split in the 11th century. So the split between the East and the West was still very fresh. And I think the way Thomas writes here, he says, nevertheless, the custom of celebrating with unleavened bread is more reasonable. But then he says, however, this custom of the Greeks is not unreasonable, both on account of its signification, blah, blah, blah. So he's basically saying, you know what? You have to have wheat bread, and if you don't have wheat bread, it's not going to be a valid consecration. But the leavened thing, it's better to do it unleavened, and this is what the Roman Church declares. But we're not going to get ourselves, too.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was just reading I was just looking at an article from Catholic.com, and they were saying that it should be is unleavened bread is to be used in the Latin rite.
Oh, okay.
So,
okay.
At least in the Latin rite. That doesn't mean it's...
Yeah. And I remember the nitpicky thing about the timing. And,
right.
So Thomas's response says, the Paschal solemnity began on the evening of the 14th day of the moon. So then, after immolating the Paschal lamb, Christ instituted this sacrament. Hence, this day is said by John to precede the day of the Pasch, while the other three evangelists call it the first day of the Azyme. So there seems to be some question about the timing of it, and three of the gospel writers say it's here, and John says it's here, and so again, it's not absolutely essential anyways, and so we won't get too much into it. So all right, so what about the whole question about, hey, this is an Old Testament practice that you shouldn't do this because we're in the age of grace? Thomas says those who celebrate the sacrament with unleavened bread do not intend to follow the ceremonial of the law, but to conform to Christ's institution. So they are not Judaizing. That's a word that Aquinas uses. You're not being you're not acting like Jews. Otherwise, those celebrating in fermented bread would be Judaizing. Okay, so he's saying, hey, this is not like the Seder meal or something like that. And, okay, he says, leaven denotes charity on account of one single effect because it makes the bread more savory and larger, but it also signifies corruption from its very nature. All right, so that's Article 4. If you have any questions about this.
We have a question. I'm just waiting for a little bit of clarification I'm going to ask you about in just a second, okay? So once I get clarification, I'll let you know. But Amy's been listening in her car and says that what about during a Eucharistic emergency? And I'm not sure exactly what part she's referring to, so I'm asking for clarification.
Oh, I wonder if she's going back to your situation, like in the camping.
Oh, yeah, if there's a situation.
But I don't think there could be a Eucharistic emergency. And again, Amy can clarify because it's not...
She says she's kind of kidding, but I suppose there could be one.
Because you never have to, as we learned last week, the Eucharist is not necessary. You could live your life. Now, I know there's a precept of the church that says you have to receive the Eucharist once a year. But Thomas says, as we learned last week, is that it's not so much the Eucharist that's necessary as it's the desire of the Eucharist. Okay, so in your camping example, and you're out camping with a priest and you don't have bread and wine, the very desire of the Eucharist would suffice, if you're not able to receive it, because there are a lot of people that may not be able to receive the Eucharist. But I don't think that you're going to be able to be saved or, get to heaven if you don't desire Jesus.
Okay,
in the first
I have
place.
an emergency.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I've thought about this. Now, again, I could be completely misremembering, but didn't we last week talk about... Was it last week that we were talking about, or was it with you, or was I just talking to someone else?
I'm confused.
Me too. That when someone is near death, they should receive the Eucharist. Did we talk about that last week?
Yeah, Viaticum, yes.
Got it.
Yes.
I don't know if that would constitute as an emergency or not, but if, let's say, a priest is there and doesn't have a host nearby and would like to give this person the Eucharist, would that be considered an emergency?
Again, you don't have to have Viaticum.
Right.
I mean, if you have the desire for Jesus in your heart as you're dying, I think that like, for lack of a better word, it counts.
Yeah.
Now, if you were able to receive Jesus sacramentally, I think that is certainly better and it's certainly more suitable. But, in that example, what would be the alternative? I mean, if he doesn't have a host, what would he do? I mean,
I have no idea.
Yeah,
I was just throwing it out
so, I mean, what are you going to do? Like, consecrate an apple?
I just was throwing out I was being devil's advocate for all the situations that could potentially happen.
All the possible situations, okay.
It makes sense if we just come back to it's the desire at the end of the day. Yeah.
And it's like desire baptism. I mean, somebody that, Thomas uses the example of Ambrose had a friend who was going through RCIA back in the day, and he died before it, but he said, hey, he had the desire for baptism. He died, and he was never, baptized in the formal way. But
you get hit by a truck on your way to confession, you had the desire to go to confession. And
I know. I'm always very careful on the way to confession.
I'm always this is the time I need to be very slow, just like take my time.
Okay, so our article number 5. And we better get going. I'm going to run out of time. I promise.
Sorry, I keep being devil's advocate.
This will not go past 1 o'clock. Article 5 says whether wine is of the grape is the proper matter of the sacrament. And objection says as water is the matter of baptism, so is wine the matter of the sacrament. But baptism can be conferred with any kind of water. Therefore, this sacrament can be celebrated with any kind of wine, such as pomegranates or mulberries. Okay, so they're saying, hey, does it have to be the wine of the grape? This one's interesting too. Vinegar is a kind of wine drawn from the grape. Did you know that?
Yes, I did know that one.
But this sacrament cannot be celebrated with vinegar. So is vinegar?
Yeah, it's derived from grapes.
Okay,
sometimes you buy a bottle of vinegar, there's also different types. So like red wine vinegar and things like that, but you'll see pictures of grapes on them.
All right. So remember when they said that Jesus compared himself to, unless the grain of wheat fall and die, it cannot, here's the reason why wine is used. Our Lord compared himself to the grain of wheat, so also he compared himself to the vine, saying, I am the true vine, but only bread from wheat is the matter of the sacrament. Therefore, only wine from the grape is the proper matter of this sacrament. So there's the scriptural evidence of why it's wine of the grape. And this sacrament can only be performed from wine from the grape. First, on account of Christ's institution. since he instituted the sacrament in wine from the grape. Okay. He said, I will not drink from henceforth of this. Secondly, because as stated above, that it is adopted as the matter of the sacraments, which is properly and universally considered as such. This one I love. Wine from the grape is more in keeping with the effect of the sacrament, which is spiritual, that wine may cheer the heart of man. So he's saying it's actually the intoxicating aspect.
Oh, interesting.
So is going to be important. Wine becomes vinegar by corruption. Okay, this is the response to vinegar. Hence, there is no returning from vinegar to wine. As this sacrament may not be made from bread, which is utterly corrupt, so neither can it be made from vinegar. However, it could be made from wine which is turning sour. Okay, so if wine is turning a little bit sour,
but not full on vinegar yet.
So vinegar is sour wine.
Yeah, it's there's different ways they make it, but that is one way. Yes, if you've probably had before, Dave, where you've opened a bottle of wine that's been there maybe a little too long, and you try it, and it's just straight
kind of
vinegar.
Yeah. Okay, so article number 6. This one's very interesting. Why is water mixed with wine? Why do they put a little bit of water into the wine? Have you ever thought about that?
I haven't thought about it that much, but I have definitely noticed that that's a thing that happens. Can I just throw out like a random thought? Why? This is literally the first thing that comes to my head is that when the Roman soldiers pierced the side of Jesus, blood and water flow out. Is that why?
That's one of the reasons.
Okay. Well, I'll take that as like, how many reasons are there?
No, I don't know. He's going to give a few of them.
Okay.
But,
I have a percentage.
No, he's going to give 4.
Okay, I'm 25%.
Yeah, you got. But yeah, it's interesting. So one of the objections is, Christ's sacrifice was foreshadowed by Melchizedek, but Melchizedek only offered bread and wine. He didn't offer water. Okay, kind of a weak argument, but nonetheless. Objection 2, various sacraments have their respective matters, but water is the matter of baptism. Therefore, it should not be employed as the matter of the sacrament. So it basically saying, hey, water's already taken, okay? Water's for baptism. Why does, the Eucharist need it as well? And then he says, nothing is added to bread. Why do we have to add something to the wine? All right? Okay, so here's the reason. Water ought to be mingled with the wine which is offered in this sacrament. First of all, on account of its institution. For it is believed with probability that our Lord instituted this sacrament in wine tempered with water according to the custom of that country.
Interesting. Okay, so it was kind of known for them to kind of water down their wine.
Yeah.
Was that to make it go further, or was that just simply because their wine was very strong and they had a tendency of like...
Yeah.
Just they wanted to lessen the strength.
Yeah, that I don't know. But they're definitely going to say that in this, it has to be a tiny amount.
Right. It's not like we're not doing a 1-for-1, like a half a cup of water, half a cup of wine. It reminds me of like kids getting their juice watered down by their parents so they have less energy.
Okay. Secondly, because it harmonizes with the representation of our Lord's passion. Hence, the Lord's chalice, neither wine nor water ought to be offered, but both mixed, because we read that both flowed from his side in the passion. All right, Cecil Anderson, well done.
Get a gold star.
Cecil got that one right. So, thirdly, because this is adapted for signifying the effect of this sacrament, we see that the people are signified by the water, but Christ's blood by the wine. So when that drop of water goes into the wine, the water represents us blending with Christ, okay? Therefore, when water is mixed with the wine and the chalice, the people are made one with Christ. Fourthly, because it is appropriate to the fourth effect of this sacrament, which is the entering into everlasting life. And then he quotes Ambrose, the water flows into the chalice and springs forth into everlasting life. So now, believe me, next time at Mass, you're going to think about this, okay? When you see the water being poured into the chalice, I mean, this like happens and nobody thinks about this, okay? But Aquinas, he thought about it, believe me. Okay, so the whole Melchizedek thing, he says, just as Christ's sacrifice is denoted by the offering of Melchizedek, so likewise is it signified by the water which flowed from the rock in the desert. but they drank of the spiritual rock which came after them. Okay, so he's saying, okay, if you want to talk about Melchizedek, we can also talk Old Testament, the water from the river, from the rock. Okay. And, you remember the one about, well, we don't add anything to the bread. Why do we add something to the wine? And Aquinas says, bread is made of water and flour.
That was literally what I was thinking. I was like, bread doesn't just happen. You add things to the flour
but
to
you
make
don't
it
do
happen.
It so like during Mass.
Right. You just don't do it. That would take a lot longer. Mass would do a lot longer. You'd have to pull out the wood fire oven and get it all ready.
Yeah, because it takes a while to make bread, doesn't it?
It does. Even unleavened bread takes a while.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, number 7. Okay, we're down to our last 2. Whether the mixing with water is essential to this sacrament. I love this because, okay, do we have to add the water? What would you think?
Well, after the points he just gave, I'd say yes.
Okay. So
with confidence.
Don't double down, Sissel, because for the first time in this show, let us just make Sissel is wrong. It's not
the first time,
it's not
and it won't be the last.
necessary, okay?
Man.
So the objection says, at our Lord's Passion, which this is the memorial, water as well as blood flowed from his side. Okay, so if water and blood flow from his side, well, then we need both of them, right? Further, if water were not essential to this sacrament, it would not matter in the least of what kind of water is used. But And so you're going to find out in a moment that you have to use a particular kind of water, which is interesting, okay? So he says, adding of water to the wine is for the purpose of signifying the sharing of this sacrament by the faithful in this respect, that by the mixing of the water with the wine is signified the union of the people with Christ. But that this sacrament is completed in the consecration of the matter, while the usage of the faithful is not essential to the sacrament. Okay, so it's not essential to the sacrament that somebody partake of it. Okay, you can consecrate the Eucharist without anybody taking it, right? So it's not essential.
I would like to protest Aquinas. He built up this beautiful argument for why water is in, and it was so beautiful about us mixing with God, and then okay.
No. Listen to this one. This is pretty interesting because you're talking about both the blood and the water flowed from his side, right? So he says the shedding of the blood belonged directly to Christ's passion. For it is natural for blood to flow from a wounded human body, but the flowing of the water was not necessary for the passion, but merely to show its effect. So when water flowed out of his side, like if I were to cut myself, water isn't going to flow out, but blood will. So he's saying, well, the water wasn't even natural in the first place, right? Okay, since the mixing of water with the wine is not necessary for the sacrament, it does not matter as to the essence of the sacrament. Water is added to the wine, whether natural water or artificial or rose. Okay, so since it's not necessary that water be used in the first place, it's not absolutely necessary what kind of water. But then he also says, but it should. He says, he would sin who mixes any other than natural and true water, because true water flowed from the side of Christ hanging on the cross. To which I would say, how do we know that? I mean, we didn't take any samples, did we? I mean,
no.
How do we know what kind of water flowed from the side of Christ?
True.
Okay. All right. Finally, article number 8, and we're going to finish on time. We got 10 minutes. Whether water should be added in great quantity.
No.
Okay. Now this is okay. Why not? Why not a whole bunch of water? Okay. There's a very specific reason.
I don't think this is the reason, but I think it could be part of the reason that it's at that point if you're adding so much, like either equal or more than the wine. I just feel like that'd be weird when it's representing the blood of, when we're talking about it is the blood of Christ. It would be weird if it was more water. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because because the species should be the wine.
It should be mostly the wine.
Okay. All right. So a threefold opinion. Okay. No. Okay. Okay. We're going to close out with this. This is pretty interesting. We're almost done here. So this is interesting. He says there's a threefold opinion regarding the water added to the wine. Okay. Some say that the water remains by itself when the wine is changed into blood, but such an opinion cannot stand. Okay, so you add water, and then the wine is consecrated into the blood, but the water doesn't. Okay, why would that matter, right? He says because then you would. He says, okay. in the sacrament of the altar, after the consecration, there is nothing else save the body and the blood of Christ. So after the consecration, you have the body and the blood of Christ. In this case, you'd have the body of the Christ, the blood of Christ, and some water. That's kind of hanging around, which is interesting. Okay, number 2, he says, others have said that as the wine is, this is really interesting, as the wine is changed into the blood, so the water is changed into the water which flowed from Christ's side.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that interesting?
So not only do we have the blood of Christ, we technically have the water of Christ.
Yeah, but now he's saying some people say
Some
that.
people
This
say
is
that.
not the why now.
But it's an interesting thought. I mean, it kind of makes sense.
But why can you not do that? He's going to give a very logical reason why you can't say that. He said this cannot be maintained reasonably because according to this, the water would be consecrated apart from the wine as the wine is from the bread. So you would have 3 consecrations.
Right, because it was the whole point that it was separated.
Yeah, yeah. So he says the more probable opinion is that which holds that the water is changed into wine because it diffuses,
Well, Jesus has done it before, so it's not like it's a new thing.
Yeah, and the wine into blood. Now that's a good point. I never thought about that. So Jesus turned water into wine. I just thought that, like, if I put a drop of water into, let's say,
a soda or something, it's going to be...
it becomes soda.
Right.
Not like miraculously, but it just kind of blends.
It just becomes part of it,
It blends in, right?
You mix 2 things together.
And that's why you need a tiny amount, by the way, okay? Because, it's more probable opinion that which holds that the water is changed into wine and the wine into blood. Now, this could not be done unless so little water was used that it would be changed into wine. So I think he's talking about the natural. It kind of blends in, right? It's like if a really bad smell comes, but eventually it just kind of diffuses into the air, and you can no longer. It just becomes part of the air, right? It just kind of it blends in because, it is also safer to add little water, especially if the wine be weak, because the sacrament could not be celebrated if there were such addition of water as to destroy the species of the wine. Because if you keep adding water...
Yeah, there's a point where you just have wine-flavored water.
Yeah, exactly. So at some point, I mean, you matter if you got a cup of wine and you add 10 gallons of water, well, now you have water. You don't have wine. Right?
Amy's pointing out that blood is mostly water anyway.
Yeah, just like the Coke is mostly water.
Right.
And most things are mostly water, right? I mean, our bodies are mostly water, right? Okay, and then must be under wine. Actual. Okay, so that's that. All right. So I asked you at the beginning. I was going to ask you, what was the question going to be? Did you learn
Was it
something?
interesting?
Was it interesting, or did you find any of that
I am
interesting?
fascinated. I did enjoy that quite a lot. I'm sorry for taking us off topic several times, but it's a lot of questions, a lot of curiosities. I think the next time I go to Mass this Sunday, I'm going to be more attuned to some of these things, just focusing a little bit more. And actually, now that when I see the priests putting in a little bit of water, I'm going to be like, I know what's happening. I know why we're doing that.
I had to sit through a big explanation of Thomas Aquinas about this, but well, I mean, and I'm not a real like liturgical kind of guy.
Sure.
Like it's not the most fascinating part of
to understand all the. Some people know all the different types of liturgies and when certain things are allowed and not allowed. It's crazy.
Yeah, and I think to probably be a good priest, you have to be really into liturgy and be very interested in it. But it's not that I'm not interested; it's just not my jam, so to speak. All right. Well, hey, I thank everybody for hanging with me and Sissel and for watching the program. And I hope you enjoyed that as much as I enjoyed presenting it. And now here's an interesting little programming note. We will not have a program next week because we have our Share-a-thon going on. The following week is, I think we have a program. And then the week after that, Sissel is going to be the host. And I have confirmed, Sissel, that I am emceeing that event,
okay.
So you're going to be at. I don't know that you need to do this topic though, because
that's good because I wasn't
since
planning
I'm
on
kind
it.
of fun. What are you going to do?
I know we've talked about them before, but because I just recently did a young adult night, formation night, all about the virtues. specifically the cardinal virtues,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Aquinas writes quite a lot about them.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I will be honest, I'm going to bring in some other people besides Aquinas as well, because
okay.
because also C.S. Lewis actually wrote a lot about the.
Well, you've already given this some thought.
I have.
Yeah,
Again,
look at you.
I did put a lot of work into an hour-long presentation already, so I kind of have that knowledge, and then I'm going to adapt it to fit this, because I think the virtues are always fun to talk about.
Okay, so just
That's my
kind of
thought.
just kind of looking at the calendar here real quickly, so everybody can pay. So on the 28th, which is next week, no show. The 4th of April will be yours truly hosting. I will. And then on the 11th, which is the next week, it'll be Sissel. Okay, and then God willing, and the creek don't rise, I'll be back on the 18th. And we'll continue with our study of the Eucharist. I'm kind of enjoying this. I don't know. I just, for reasons I explained last week, I think we just really have to get to know the Eucharist and think about it more often. I think if you think about something, you just naturally develop a greater devotion to it, right?
True.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. And that is going to do it for this week's Back to the Father. And we'll see you in 2 weeks for the next Back to the Father. Don't forget the Share-a-thon with the theme of Talking Heaven will be next week. We appreciate your support very much. God bless you. Have a great rest of your Friday and a great weekend.
Thanks for joining us for Back to the Father. And don't forget, the glory of God is the human person fully alive. If you have comments about the show, email Dave Palmer at grnonline.com.